So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about how to build a shrimp breeding colony. Now, here in the fish room, we've got thousands of shrimp. It's not even funny. And in specific today, we're going to be talking about how to breed Neocaridina shrimp. So, you know, your common cherry shrimp, so yellow cherry shrimp, blue dream shrimp, red cherry shrimp, orange sun-kissed shrimp, any Neocaridina species we're going to be talking about today. For those of you guys who don't know, my name's Nick, and I've got a huge fish room here in Brisbane, Australia. I've got a shop out the front, which you guys can come and visit, and I breed a ton of fish and accidentally breed a ton of shrimp as well. And when I was a beginner, I kind of struggled with shrimp the first time I had them because I was just a young kid and I didn't understand it. There wasn't a lot of information on how to care for them, and I had no experience, and I failed, I think, my first 2 or 3 colonies. And since then, I've succeeded, and now we breed thousands of shrimp on a yearly basis. We supply a whole store with them. We breed them and sell them really, really cheap. And I've had a lot of success with them. And today I'm just going to try and share as much of that information as I can with you guys. So if you want to start up a little shrimp breeding colony, by the end of this video, hopefully you'll be able to do it the same as I have. So I've actually got like a little thing of notes here that I've written out. And I've made videos on this before, so I'd recommend watching those as well. But today I'm going to just try and talk about some of the things that I've learned kind of over the last maybe 12 months on how to breed shrimp. So I guess we'll start with like the tank size. So this is a 20-gallon tank here. The fish room has a few different sizes of tanks, but mainly for breeding shrimp, I use these 20-gallon tanks. These are 2 foot long. I've also got 4 foot tanks where I'm breeding a lot of shrimp too. I'm not overly concerned about the size of a tank for shrimp because they are such small creatures that it doesn't really matter too much. Like they only get 3.5 centimeters max. So they're really, really small, and you know, you could do these theoretically in a 5-gallon tank, which, you know, that could be an option, but I'd probably recommend to go for like a 10-gallon minimum. The bigger, the better, because with more water volume comes more stability. And once you get it right, you're also going to get more breeding with more space. So I would recommend going as big as possible. I just happen to use these 20-gallon tanks, and they seem to work pretty well for me. The next thing is water quality. This is probably the most important thing with shrimp. A lot of people, when they start out in aquariums, don't understand water quality, and I definitely didn't. Water quality is one of those things where I don't obsess over it and focus on it so much. I just try and use what I've got. So here in Brisbane, my water quality is perfect for Neocaridina shrimp. These shrimp really prefer like a harder water, so not super duper hard, but like they don't really like it soft. So when I say the softness of the water, I'm not a chemist, so I'm probably going to butcher this, but your water has minerals in it. So like, these are commonly referred to like KH and GH. I don't really obsess over this so much. I kind of just test the TDS of water to see where it's at and just kind of take a guess. But the more minerals you have in the water, the better for these guys, because it helps, I think, with their exoskeletons and their shedding, and where they come from in the wild must have higher minerals in the water. So most people's town water does have mineral in it. And for you guys at home wondering if your town water is good for shrimp, what I'd recommend is just suck it and see. I'd recommend just getting like a small group of 10 and seeing how they go, trying to find them off a local breeder, preferred to like imported shrimp. Try and find like a guy nearby to you that's having success breeding shrimp, and see if he's breeding them in the town water. And if they're breeding them in the town water, the likely chances that yours are going to breed in the same water. So they do prefer it a little bit hard. For those of you guys wondering, my TDS here is about 200 parts per million out of the tap, and the pH is around 7.2 to 7.6. But I don't really worry so much with the pH. I've kept them in pretty high pHs, and I've also kept them in pretty low pHs. Cherry shrimp and Neocaridina shrimp, for the most part, once you get them settled in, don't really stress too much over these things. I mean, some people will probably disagree with me, but I just tend to not focus on these little parameters and things like that. I just set them up and suck it and see for a lot of the times when I'm breeding stuff. So the other thing too is temperature. I found Neocaridinas can take a very, very wide temperature range. I've kept them from anywhere about 15 degrees Celsius all the way up to 30 degrees Celsius. So if you're in a town where it does get cold, I'd get a little heater and keep that fish tank at about 20 degrees Celsius minimum. But you can keep them in 28, you can keep them in 30 degrees Celsius. I think they tend to do a little bit better in that mid-range, so like 22 to 23 degrees Celsius seems to work really, really well for them. But like I said, in summer they breed like crazy, and in winter they breed just as crazy. So I haven't found it to be too much of an issue. You just don't want them getting too cold and freezing, and you also don't want them getting too hot and cooking them. But if you've got really soft water, you might struggle with these a little bit, but I've never kept them in soft water, so I wouldn't be one to know. The only reason I say that is because I've been to like places with soft water and I haven't seen a lot of people breeding them. So I'm not talking totally out of experience, but my biggest piece of advice would just be to find someone local to you that is likely going to have the same water quality to you, if that makes sense. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is the actual setup itself. This is a pretty good example of how to set up a shrimp tank. In here, this is like a peppermint bristlenose breeding tank, so I'm actually using this tank to breed a catfish at the same time, which you can do with your shrimp colonies. But I've got a sponge filter in here on like a medium aeration. I've got some house plants coming out of the top of the tank, which is optional, but I like to add that to a lot of my tanks. I've got a bag of crushed coral in here, and I'll talk about why I have that in a second. And I've got a piece of driftwood in here as well. With your tank at home, I'd recommend doing all of these things, like having a piece of driftwood, because a piece of driftwood is going to create biofilm. I'd recommend having a bag of crushed coral because the coral is actually going to buffer your water. So if there's like any acid forming in the water, it's going to eat away at that crushed coral and help to buffer the water and stop it from crashing in the pH. But also I find that shrimp just seem to do much better when I do have like some coral in the tank. I don't know if they eat off of it or if it adds carbonate hardness to the water and helps with their exoskeletons. But for me, it just seems to help a ton having the crushed coral in there. I think sponge filters are great for shrimp because they don't suck them up. Like a canister filter is going to suck up baby shrimp and ruin the breeding. Sponge filters are great because they don't hurt shrimp, and you can see these sponge filters are covered in the shrimp because they actually eat off of it. So the sponge filter itself creates biofilm, and it also sucks up little particles of food and things that these catfish aren't eating, and the shrimp just go to the sponge filter and eat off of it. So I find sponge filters probably the best for breeding shrimp, and I only use sponge filters here at the room. The only thing that this tank could do with is some live plants, but I do have those house plants out the top of the tank kind of helping me a little bit. But you know, you could add some anubias to this tank or some floating foxtail or something like that, which I would have in other tanks. And the reason I add that is because it gives the shrimp more places for the biofilm to grow. And I'm going to talk about biofilm in a second, but it also helps to just turn the tank into a little bit of an ecosystem and helps it to grow. And the live plants actually suck up like the bad chemicals created by the shrimp's poop, and live plants just help out every single tank. I try and keep little plants in all of my little tanks and try and keep them as natural as possible. So now we're going to talk about food. So shrimp, mainly when we're trying to breed shrimp, we're trying to grow biofilm. So biofilm is that slimy layer that grows on surfaces in the water. It pretty much forms everywhere underneath the water, and shrimp actually eat off of this in the wild. So it mainly forms on like decaying driftwood, leaves, all that sort of good stuff. And it's primarily the shrimp's main food source. So the reason we want to add live plants and a sponge filter and things like that is because that biofilm grows. And the biofilm's not so important for adult shrimp, but it's very, very important for baby shrimp. You want it pretty much everywhere because baby shrimp, I've found, once they're born, kind of go to like one spot in the tank and then just eat off of that. So you want there to be biofilm in that area. So there's a few things you can do to promote the growth of biofilm. One of the things that I do is I keep obviously lights on my tanks. I think lighting is also really important for growing a shrimp colony. I keep the light on for about 8 hours a day, and that seems to help with growing like a little bit of algae and the biofilm. But yeah, shrimp primarily eat biofilm. I also feed the tanks lots and lots of bug buffet and green cuisine, and these are great foods for your shrimp. You don't want to overfeed. You want to feed a really little amount and build it up slowly. But the good thing about the bug buffet and the green cuisine is that you can break it up and form it like into a milk in the tank, and that powder goes all over the tank and covers all the surfaces in the tank and kind of acts like biofilm. And anything that's not eaten actually feeds the biofilm. That's what I feed the shrimp. I think feeding the shrimp's like not something you need to worry about too much. Like I feed the shrimp daily here, but you could feed them every 3 days and still have just as much success. You're just trying to grow that biofilm and keep the tank as stable as possible. Another good thing is to add botanicals to your tank. So I sell some of these on my website as well, but biofilm, the leaves are going to soak down to the bottom, break down, they instantly form that biofilm, and shrimp will eat the entire leaves, and that's what they eat in the wild. So I also add botanicals to the tanks. The next thing I'm going to talk about is water changes. I've kind of confused myself a little bit over the last few years on how much water changes to do on my Neos, because I used to do like very minimal water changes and have a lot of success, and now like these fish tanks here get quite a lot of water changes, probably like 50% every few days, and I've still had success. So I think my piece of advice if I was starting a new shrimp colony, if I was a beginner, would be to probably just start with minimal water changes, maybe 10% once a week, and just see how you go. Try not to shock the shrimp too much and let that like ecosystem actually settle in a little bit. And then over time, if you feel a need to bump the water changes up, do it. But again, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, it's just best to start with less because you don't want to shock these shrimp into an early molt. I'm starting to sound like a bit complicated here, but less is more with the shrimp, I find. Another little piece of advice is to add like snails to the tank. So this tank here doesn't have snails, but it does have little baby catfish in here that are kind of doing the same thing. But a lot of the tanks I have with snails and shrimp seem to do really, really well because they kind of work together as detritivores, and the snails never eat baby shrimp. And in fact, I think the snails leave like a little bit of like a layer of sludge when they move around the tank that I think the shrimp actually eat as well. So they kind of work really well together. I keep mystery snails, rabbit snails, and I don't really like the pest snails, but those mystery snails and the rabbit snails with the shrimp seem to just work beautifully. So that's another little piece of advice, is to keep some snails with them. It's not essential, but I found that it does help like a little bit, just with, especially if you overfeed the shrimp, the snails seem to clean up all that leftover food pretty well and can help you a lot. So once you've got like all of this stuff down pat and you're gonna go buy some shrimp, I think one of the best things to do as well is to start with like a bigger number of shrimp. Shrimp are quite sensitive, especially going from someone else's water to your water. In any case, like even if I went and bought shrimp from a new person, I'd expect to lose. If I bought 10, I'd probably expect to lose at least 2. So normally the best way to start a really nice shrimp breeding colony is to start big. And I'm not recommending to go out and buy 50 red cherry shrimp today and start them in a tank. But what I'd probably recommend is to start with as many as possible. We sell packs of 20 for $50 on our website, and that's normally a pretty good place to start. That's going to give you a good mix of males and females. Male shrimp are less colourful and a little bit smaller, and the females are kind of like a bit more bulky and normally have a bit deeper of colour. Starting with 20 means you're going to get a good mix between males and females, and it also means you're starting your nest egg of shrimp with a bigger amount, which means the compound growth off those shrimp is going to be much larger than if you started with like 3 shrimp. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get like, if you say you have like 5 buried females, well, say you have 5 females in your first group, the males are going to fertilize the females, and then within, I think it takes 22 days, the females are going to get buried, incubate their eggs underneath their pleropods, and give birth to those shrimp in 22 days. And they might have like 20 shrimp. So you're going to instantly, if you have 5 females, you're going to have 100 shrimp added to the colony. Those little babies take another 2 months to grow before they can reach breeding size. So there's going to be like an extra, another month and then another month, but then they're going to be breeding as well. And instead of having like 1 female to start with, you have 5, and it just ends up being a much stronger and bigger colony. So starting with more shrimp is often the way to go. But if I was a new person and I was starting out, I'd set my tank up. I would leave it for about a week just to like settle in and just to become a tank. It's built, let the biofilm start forming everywhere. And I'd go to my store and I'd buy like 5 shrimp. I'd just start with a really small number. I'd add them to the tank and see how they go. The way I would add them to the tank is I'd do a drip acclimation. A drip acclimation is just a really slow process from taking them from the old water they're going into the new water they're going into. I'd look into doing that because you don't want to force them into an early molt. But I'd add the first 5 to the tank and just see how they go. I'd leave them for like 2 weeks, see if they're still alive and still kicking on and doing well. And after that 2 weeks, I'd go on to buy like 20. Once I knew that they were doing good, because starting with more means you're going to get a way better breeding colony, you're going to get more genetic diversity, and yeah, it's just going to go nuts. So normally when I start a breeding tank, I always start with like 20. I start with as many as I can. But I guess from there, like they're going to breed up, making sure there's biofilm, live plants, all the things I've talked about in this video. I feel like this message is kind of convoluted. I've given a lot of information that it might come across a bit confusing. Keeping shrimp's really, really easy. I think the most important thing is just consistency, patience. I think having a good food as well, something that they really enjoy, it helps as well. So like bug buffet, green cuisine, I always promote those 2 foods because obviously they're mine. But yeah, having patience as well. Like this colony here has gone nuts, but I've had this colony going for 1.5 to 2 years now, and they've really hit their stride. Like these are babies of babies of babies, and they've really adjusted to this water quality. It takes a long time before you're going to have tons of success with your shrimp. From starting the colony, you can't expect to have like a booming population for at least 6 months. And then from there, to get like a really solid line of your own shrimp takes like another year. And this is because I think they micro-adapt to like the certain waters that you have. So I've got some snowball shrimp that have just never really settled into this fish room for some reason. And I've got a few buried females. I'm going to see how they go over the next few months. But like I also fail with certain strains of shrimp. So it took me a while to get a really solid yellow line in here, and it took me a while to get a solid blue line in here as well. So having patience and waiting is the most important thing. Shrimp don't respond well to big changes, so don't do big water changes. Try not to overfeed. Just, keep them consistent. And yeah, I think I've given all the information that I can think of in this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I just, got the camera out today and tried to film something, but yeah, that's how I'd start a little shrimp breeding colony. So good luck with your shrimps, and let me know how they go down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.